everyone, it's Aaron here from Revisuals. Hope everyone is doing well, and in today's video we're talking all about B-roll, specifically 5 mistakes and bad habits that you can correct with your own B-roll to improve your shots. So these are literally 5 mistakes and bad habits that I still make even to this day. They're things that I know that I am very much guilty of doing and that I'm actively trying to reduce. So don't feel bad if you're guilty of making them too. Ultimately, we are all learning and trying to get better at the same time. And honestly, some of these bad habits I've been doing for years now. So hopefully this video will just help you not repeat some of the mistakes that I've been making and save you some time and headache on your next shoot and help you get better footage ultimately. So let's not waffle anymore and get straight into number 1. So I'm kicking off this list with probably my biggest guilty pleasure, and that's slow motion. Slow-mo B-roll just seems to be everywhere these days, and when I first got into filmmaking I definitely jumped on that hype train of doing lots of slow-mos, speed ramps into slow-mo, and all my footage was in 120 frames per second no matter what it was, and if it wasn't slow-mo it wasn't cinematic. But then I started asking myself, like, how often do you ever see slow-mo in actual movies? Like, what percentage of a movie is even in slow-mo? Apart from maybe like a few select action sequences like in a car chase or a fight scene. And, think about what purpose does it serve to have every shot in slow motion? What is it adding to the storytelling? What impact is it having? If the answer is nothing and you're just doing it for the sake of it, then it probably doesn't need to be in slow-mo in the first place. So take this color fun run video example I shot last year versus this year. So last year nearly everything that I shot was slowed down because I wanted to try and freeze frame all the action that was going on, and that's fine, but when it's done on almost every shot it almost adds this unintentional kind of dreamy, lethargic kind of feel, but you also lose all the hype and energy and feeling. And compared that to this year when most of the shots are actually in normal motion and only a very few select shots are in slowed down, the energy and the excitement of what is actually happening comes through so much better, and those select shots that are slowed down were intentionally done to freeze a facial expression or a fun moment. So long story short, just because you can shoot in 100 frames or 120 frames, it doesn't mean that you have to. Just make sure that if it is, it's done for a purpose. There's a meaning behind it, and it's not just because you can. Next up, another mistake that I often make is just shooting everything with a shallow depth of field. Again, for one reason or another, it just kind of seems like in the filmmaking and photography community, we're obsessed with having more shallow depth of field, but just like with frame rate, what is the intentional purpose of shooting everything with a shallow depth of field? If you're isolating a subject, getting a nice portrait type shot, or trying to get more light in a low light setting, then yeah, it looks great. That's a good reason to use those things. But I started realizing that I was literally shooting everything this way when actually it's not always beneficial. Again, think back to your favorite movies or TV shows and you'll be surprised at how many shots, supposedly cinematic shots, are actually not even using shallow depth of field. They're in sharp focus throughout the frame. Sometimes we actually want to see what's in the background. That's not to say that depth of field can't be amazing. Of course it can be for that subject separation, but honestly, take this interview example. We want to show a little bit of what's going on in the background because it's relevant to what's being said. So shooting this at f1.2, for example, would have just completely washed out that background, and it would have kind of take away from the overall feel and the background, the story behind what's happening. So again, using some more sports examples, I purposely made sure not to go below f5.6, f8 here, because with action shots we want everything to be in focus. We don't want the AF to be hunting all over the place. Compare this to another shoot where I was shooting stuff at f2.8 the entire time. I just got this lens and I was really excited to shoot everything wide open, but I was actually having a really hard time keeping everything in focus and getting the shots I wanted. Not to mention it was a super bright day as well. I had my variable ND filter maxed out, and it would have just made it a lot easier to just shoot everything at a lower aperture. Look, I love shallow depth of field as much as most of you guys do, but when used right, of course it looks amazing. But ultimately, just like with frame rate, just because you can shoot at f1.2, for example, you got to be asking yourself whether you actually really need to. You don't want all your shots to look the same anyway. So simply put, just don't be afraid to mix up your apertures for different looks. So my third point about B-roll is just forgetting or just not capturing the sound at all. So this one is going to be more dependent on what kind of video that you're shooting. But for like general B-roll sequences, something I know that I have been guilty of is just not worrying about sound at all and just muting my footage from the camera mic and then throwing music track over the top. And that's fine, but adding sound to your footage adds such an amazing additional layer. It's an amazing additional storytelling tool. And of course you can just add sound effects in post, but it's just so much better to capture the authentic sound right at the source. Even if you're just throwing a cheap little like Rudy mic, that layer adds so much to the overall feel of the video. So again, using my color fun run example, last year I completely didn't even think about the sound. But this year I knew I wanted to hear all the cheering and the laughter, so I stuck this little Rode mic on the side of my gimbal because I knew from past mistakes the difference it makes to the final video is so huge in my opinion. So just consider using a microphone and recording sound at source for your next shoot. Moving on to number 4, and that's just forgetting to switch up your focal lengths. Again, something I'm super guilty of this 100% even to this day. I get really excited by kind of like the longer focal lengths, getting B-roll using my 70-100 or on the longer end of a 24-70. And I love getting up close and seeing things isolated to get that intimate perspective that I often sometimes just actually forget about using wider angles, but they can actually just be just as powerful. They are amazing storytelling tools to set the scene, to show scope, to show like the environment, to show perspective, and the actual fact, in my opinion, that they can look just as cinematic, if not more so, than like close-up shots. So there's 100% nothing wrong with longer focal lengths. Just don't forget to balance your footage with some nice wide shots too, so that you have a good mixture of perspectives of whatever it is that you're shooting. And finally, coming in at number 5, this is relying on smooth motion for everything. Are you relying on like a gimbal? So now I have said on this channel multiple times in the past that to get better footage, you should use a gimbal, a slider, Steadicam, etc. That smoother footage versus shake is what you want. So I know that this comes off as a little bit hypocritical, and of course using gimbals etc to get smooth footage is amazing, but my point is that I was relying so much on a gimbal for everything that I was doing. It didn't matter if I was shooting like B-roll for a graduation ceremony, for a sports event, marketing campaign videos, whatever it was, I just had my camera on a gimbal. I just thought you needed a gimbal for everything. But sometimes we don't always want the shot to be ultra smooth. In fact, sometimes it can be detrimental. Sometimes we want a little bit of movement, we want that little bit of shake because it adds energy, it adds pace and vibrancy to a shot. So sometimes handheld shots would suit something better. So my point is, I realized I was just relying so much on my gimbal that it was actually detrimental to my ability when shooting without a gimbal. I kind of just felt lost without it. So I'm not saying don't use a gimbal, I'm just saying don't rely on it all the time, and remember there's a time and a place for everything. So there you have it, 5 of my bad B-roll habits. Most of them pretty much just boil down to just not being too over-reliant on one thing, whether that's slow motion or shallow depth of field. Just remember that like all things in life, balance is key. I know I've had the privilege of working on some really amazing projects these past 12 months, and I've been able to work with some incredibly talented filmmakers in that time. So the thing that I've really learned that really elevates those amateurs from the pros is just balance and just being more thoughtful and intentional with your shots and your techniques, and using these tools available to us within the camera to tell better stories. I do feel that within like the filmmaking community, we've become so hung up on B-roll for the sake of making B-roll and on the technical aspects of things. I can't count how many times, for example, I've watched a vlog with like a 5-minute long epic coffee making B-roll intro with your usual slow-mo speed ramps and super shallow depth of field. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but I do think it makes us focus so much more on the techniques of B-roll instead of asking ourselves, what is the point of the B-roll in the first place? And I know I am really guilty of this, and I'm actively trying to improve on that front. So I hope this video just helps you shed a little bit of light on this and show you how you can get better B-roll and learn from my mistakes and get better footage and make better videos, keep your clients happy, and ultimately just tell better stories, because that's what it's all about. Anyway, that's going to do it for this video. Let me know your thoughts on any of these down there in the comment section below, and if you have any other tips for other people to learn from, let us know down there as well. It's always great to hear from you. If you found this video helpful, do me a huge favor, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff that the YouTube algorithm gods love. You can also follow us on socials down here, and I guess as always I will see you on the next one. Peace.